everyone, and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if it's your first time. My name is Cinzia, I'm a PhD student in classics, and today I'm going to be discussing why literature is worth studying from my personal perspective. So if you are new to me, hi, I did my undergraduate in English literature and classics, literature and civilization. I did my master's in English literature and now doing my PhD in classics, and with a speciality looking at classical literature in translation, and then also classical retellings by contemporary authors, and broadening, you know, the politics of translation, the politics of classical retellings, and why they are the way they are. So my focus is very much on literature, and I thought it'd be fun to discuss the relevancy and importance of studying literature, despite what many people would think. When you go into pursuing literature, it's a given that you're not really going to be hired for your degree. I always jest that pursuing the humanities, the arts and humanities, is a passion project, but mostly like having a baby. People don't have babies for the sake of, getting a career or getting money or having status. Like, they have babies because they want to have babies. And the same with the arts and humanities. If you want to study books and literature, particularly classics as well, you're destined to just do it as a passion project, not as a potential career move or any kind of rich prospects beyond that. But despite not having any, intrinsic impact in contemporary society and seen as relevant to anyone, I would argue that, there's a great deal of, a need for the arts and humanities to be studied, particularly at this time where, in the UK at least, arts and humanities departments, particularly the classics and ancient history departments, are being closed down across the UK in numerous universities due to lack of funding, and universities not, prioritising them in leniency towards the STEM subjects, which is fine and valid. The STEM subjects are incredibly important, but I don't think they're more important than the arts and humanities, or their poignancy is more important either. I wouldn't be the person I was today were it not for literature. And I'm saying this as someone who didn't study any classics or ancient history at school. They weren't, offered to me. I didn't go to those kind of schools. They tend to be, very like posh and fancy dandy schools. I didn't touch a classics book until I actually went to university to study classics. And, I wasn't a confident reader either. I have dyslexia. And that wasn't, acknowledged until well late into my academic career. So I didn't even know about it until far too late, after it was necessary. But I wasn't a big reader. A lot of people go into, university going, I've read books since I was a very little child. I've always read, religiously. I wasn't. Because of my undiagnosed dyslexia, I was very reluctant to read. I found it very uncomfortable, not very fun. I also wasn't a fan of the books that were marketed to me. I wasn't a fan of YA books, and I realised I just thought that's what books were, so I wasn't interested in them. And it's not to dismiss the relevancy of YA. It's a very popular genre. It just wasn't for me. It wasn't until I was 18 and I started reading other books, like The Great Gatsby, that I realised, and also To Kill a Mockingbird was a big book at the time. When I was 16, I really enjoyed that, but I still wasn't very comfortable going forward. And it wasn't until, I was 18 and started realising, oh, maybe it's a genre that I've been told to read at school or encouraged to read to school that I wasn't enjoying, rather than actually books themselves. And it is about, finding the genre that you or rather the types of books that you enjoy reading. And the ones that I was encouraged at school, I didn't really enjoy, so I wasn't a big reader. I was a massive Shakespeare fan, but I was an actress, so a whole different field of me. I was a Shakespearean actress from a very young age, so Shakespeare was a huge part of my life. So going into university, I was under that impression, and that was my literary background. It wasn't, a well-versed, Matilda-esque child going up to university. I was very new to reading, and it was actually at university that I discovered how much I wanted to read all the time. And just my love for books. When I was applying for university, particularly for English literature, but also for classics, all of my family, all of my teachers were very dismissive. They were like, you don't read enough, why are you doing this? It's because you don't know what you want to do, so you're just going into, books because it's an easy one to go into. And then I discovered my love of reading whilst at university, and I became a fanatic reader, and I wouldn't be the person I am today were it not for books. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So I have my wee little cup of tea to keep my hands warm. There are a lot of reasons for that are beyond, you know, the stereotypical escapism. A lot of people who love reading books give them the credibility of escapism, whereas I don't have that experience when reading books. I'm a very different type of reader. I don't have an imagination. I'm not sure if I have aphantasia and all that jazz. I've never... It's a very niche study. No one's really studied this thing called aphantasia, which is where you don't see pictures in your head, which is what I have. I don't see pictures in my head, but I'm not, you know, I'm not here to like diagnose myself or anything. I've just never had an imagination. And with that, when it comes to reading books, my reading experience is very different. You know, I don't enjoy books that are very image heavy or descriptive heavy. Like I avoid books that are, you know, very much into, you know, landscape-esque, you know, Tess the D'Urbervilles is like my idea of hell. I'm not really into that kind of atmospheric in terms of scenic description. I'm more into an atmospheric of words and how they employ our atmosphere using language. So I'm more of a linguistics interest rather than an imagery heavy, and it's just purely how people read. People read differently. But again, the study of literature helps you understand these different dynamics of the brain. Were I not someone who studied reading and how people read and understand literature, I wouldn't know this kind of dynamic. And also I credit literature for my exploration into two different fields. And I wouldn't have ever discovered philosophy were it not for reading ancient texts, but also literature. And it's just this web of how I came to be who I am today is entirely through books. I don't want to go too much in my past life, like my past life, as if I lived again, as if I had two lives. No, it was more, you know, I had a nasty illness when I was very young during my university years, and I found books a great comfort for me when I was very ill. It was the only thing that I found any passion or interest in doing. Even, you know, outside of, you know, I didn't do anything but read books and work and study. That was my whole world. And it makes you feel quite isolated, but I think I thrived in that environment. I think some people would see that as quite an isolating experience, but for me, it was greatly necessary for understanding not only my illness at the time, but also understanding how I can look outside myself. You know, a lot of my healing came from understanding philosophy and asking Socratic questions that led into psychology, that led into self-healing, that's led into, you know, development of, you know, understanding my dynamics and growing as a person, and expanding my empathy, seeing different viewpoints. You know, I'm not someone who is a well-travelled person. You know, it's not something we could afford growing up, and it's not something I could afford now to travel. But I felt like I could see the world through books in some way without actually visualising the experience. I could see lives in some way, or lives. You see how many flaws there are in the system through literature, and that sounds like such a bizarre jump to make, but I feel like humanities and art students, particularly literary students, can see the gaps in where systems are failing, in where they are failing to look outside of their own lens and perspectives, and not taking into consideration the greater world, the greater society, the greater, you know, impact that they have. I feel like a lot of business-minded concepts out there lack the empathy and consideration for the world, the environment, the people that they hire or rather exploit. They lack the cultural awareness of the places that they build upon. They lack the empathy and sympathy for the places that they deconstruct, the cultures that they overtake. And it's because of this echo chamber, that was the echo chamber analogy is used quite frequently in obviously social media. It's something that's more systemic. It's an echo chamber of existence. And without books, I wouldn't have been able to expand my understanding. And I'm not, you know, complete. I'm not like this all-encompassing, omniscient human who understands philosophies of all cultures and societies. If anything, I think reading has made me more aware of my ignorance and my limitations, but at least I'm conscious of that, whereas some more people are not. And that's where I feel there's a fault in the system. I feel like a lot of industries, whilst, you know, the humanities and literary students are not, you know, going to be big money makers, we're not business minds, you know, mindsets in any kind of way, in most of us anyway, not to say all. We're necessary for the morality constructors, the social constructors, and also the creative outreaches that businesses can make. I see a lot of like missed opportunities in businesses that, were they, you know, more open to creative mindsets out there, I think they would benefit from our insights. But books as a whole, you know, when the pandemic hit, in the UK at least I know, but I'm not sure if it's worldwide, but in the UK, book sales rose. You know, in the time of, you know, great crisis, people couldn't shop, and what they wanted to do was buy books and order books and keep themselves company with books. They're meaningful, they're people, they are socializations in of themselves. And, you know, I don't feel lonely when I'm in my home with books. I've never felt lonely traveling by myself. You know, I've always felt like I have someone with me during those periods of time. And also, you know, I always find books to be the original outreach systems. So let me explain. One of the issues I have with the trigger warning system that's happening at the moment, which could be a whole other situation, whilst I respect and use trigger warnings and content warnings, an example, what I'm not sure if I agree with is the banning of certain books due to the content within them, because I find that the majority of the books that are subjected to potential bannings because of the content within them are actually written by survivors of the content in which they're protecting other people who are also survivors of. So people who write about horrific experiences themselves are usually also survivors of such horrific experiences. And with this subjective, like they should be now banned from universities and not looked at, we're actually blacklisting people who are survivors of such things that are horrific, and content warning necessary, but also they are survivors of it. And I find there's this like internalized dynamic and oppression by own kinds against one another in this dynamic, and I find it problematic to ban authors writing about their personal traumatic experiences for the sake of others, because I find books, and here, this is my own point, books were the original Me Too. In a world before social media, in a world before, you know, even newspapers or common tabloids or discussions, when an author went through something very traumatic and horrific, when they wrote about it, it was a huge statement to write about this experience in their either fictionalized or non-fictionalized or semi-autobiographical version. And then a reader on the other end of that suddenly felt less alone, because they suddenly saw themselves in books and were like, oh my god, what happened to me isn't just me. This author who's written something, who's created art out of it, has gone through it. So whilst we take for granted that we can reach out for people who have gone through similar experiences to our own, in a time before when there wasn't that availability, books were the original holding out a hand and having a stranger hold it back with you and go, I've been there too, and look what I've done, look what I've written about it, look how I've processed it, and I hope the way I'm processing it helps you. And I feel like that is being overlooked a lot in today's society, because we're easy to dwindle things down to their conceptualization, and the content is becoming simplified rather than looking at the deeper psychological dynamic that constructed that art, that constructed that book. And I feel like literature serves as that purpose. Students who study that can understand that there's a deep level of so many dynamics, and it's not possible to read the same book the same way. People will interpret books in different ways, and I believe this is a skill as well that's necessary in contemporary society, because people will read a tweet and immediately deduce a meaning from said tweet and then say that's exactly what that author intended to read with it, and therefore everyone believes that too. When what literature teaches us is that's not the case. You cannot read something and deduce meaning from it, certainly not, objective meaning from it. There's certainly no truth behind it, and you never know the intention of an author. And that's a skill that's being lost in contemporary society, because people are just deducing things. They are dwindling everything down to a singular conception, and that's problematic in of itself. And I feel literature actually teaches against that. It opposes this singularity, this reductionism of what someone says. We cannot deduce what someone means from what they say, and it's deeply problematic in today's society, because we can read so much and yet so little out of what people are saying, and we don't give people the nuance, the diversity of perspective. We are self-defining in sentences and structures and paragraphs, when in reality, if anything literature's taught us, and particularly the study of literature, it's not that simple. And that's also why I believe literature, outside of the realm of like being a beautiful concept and being an enjoyable passion and pastime to study literature and books, I believe there's actually a dynamic that's being lost in society of the nuance of thought and the diversity of perspectives, and actually analysing something from a completely different perspective and not reading intention in something where you don't have access to the original author. You can't read that no matter how well you think you know someone, stalking them on social media or reading their autobiographies. We'll never truly know Virginia Woolf, we'll never really truly know Sylvia Plath, we'll never know Shakespeare, we'll never know what Ovid meant. We can reduce meanings from what they say and how they write and what they write about, but we'll never truly know. And that's being lost in today's society. People are so quick to define each other and to reduce everyone down to labels and statuses and meanings that are only subjective opinions and perceptions of what they're saying. So that's a quick video on why I think literature is worth studying, and why I enjoy reading and studying literature so much. I think it's helped me understand other humans, it's helped me broaden my perspective, it's helped me not be reductionist in my thinking, it's helped me not be so... I have my faults. I have my faults of when I have reduced meaning from something and intention from what people have said. But books teach me to keep my mind open and to check myself when I fall into that habit, because I have fallen into that habit. I do. We all do. But I'm learning more and more as I get older the importance of this nuance of reading, and it's books that I have to remind myself taught me that, and it's books that taught me philosophy. Books taught me history, books taught me classics, books taught me poetry, books taught me about theatre and plays and language and the politics of punctuation. So yes, I hope you enjoyed this chat. Let me know down below what your opinions are. Please share this video if you found it interesting and you'd like others in your literature class to discuss it. And I will see you soon for another video. And remember, books save lives, so keep reading.